President and CEO of JINSA. Very honored today to have with us here in our office the Czech National Security Advisor, Ambassador Tomas Pojar. I'm pronouncing that right, Tomas?
Pojar, but
Oh,
Pojar is
Pojar.
also
Okay,
fine.
thank you. Sorry. He's been National Security Advisor since January of 23.
For 3 years, basically, we have been creating this job, so it was in phases. But I've been for 3 years advising Prime Minister, and then officially now I am National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister and the government of Czech Republic.
And previously from 2010, 2014, just going back a bit, I know you've held a number of positions in the foreign ministry and in the Czech government, but in those years, you were also the ambassador, the Czech ambassador to Israel, as was your father. And thanks to you, I've read most of, not all, of his book on massacring the Jews, the massacre, the founding president of Czechoslovakia, and I've been learning a lot about it. Thank you very much. We've been, and also previously from 19, going back a little longer, he headed a non-government organization called People in Need. So I guess people who head nonprofits sometimes become national security advisors. I just to explain well, JINSA generally we focus most of our efforts on Middle Eastern countries. We went to Prague, and we're kind enough. We met with Tomas and the president and other senior military and national security leaders in Prague because, well, for a few reasons, but Czechia, or the Czech Republic, as is also known, has been a critical ally of the United States. I wouldn't say it gets probably adequate attention here in Washington that it deserves, but it's also been a close ally of Israel, one of them, probably Israel's closest ally in Europe, and
not probably the closest.
The closest. Okay, thank you. And that goes back a long way, as your father's book indicates. The massacre was a Zionist visited Palestine in 1927, and a number of the Jewish settlements and Christian Jewish towns and cities and Christian sites in Palestine, but was a Zionist. I think he was the first foreign president to visit what the Israelis would call the Yishuv, or was the Palestine. And anyway, we did this. We went to Prague under our annual Gatler policy trip, and it was really illuminating for those of us who went, including several senior retired U.S. generals, and we also had a couple Israeli generals. So that's the introduction, and we're very honored to have you, Tomas. And I thought we just have a little discussion, and we'll take some questions. I know. I thought the first question is: you've been here now for the inaugural of President Trump, and you're meeting Trump officials. What is the message you're delivering to U.S. officials right now?
Well, I'm more in the listening mode. I try to understand what kind of policies we can expect. Of course, we've been listening carefully what President Trump was saying during the campaign and in the recent weeks. What to understand what's going to be happening practically, how to get ready for that, and also to be using it, looking at it from the point of view of opportunities, because I think that it creates a lot of opportunities for our Czech and American cooperation, but also the European and American transatlantic, but also in other parts of the world. And I think we should be receptive to President Trump's policies. We must understand his logic and what he wants to achieve. It's being said that he's unpredictable, but in the approach he is predictable because he is a transactionist, and I think it's fair to do transactions and good transactions which are mutually beneficial. And I think we can find such transactions and we can reach such deals which will be good for us Czechs and which will be good for transatlantic community and which will be good for the free world.
Obviously, I imagine one of the issues highest on your agenda is the Ukraine war, and I was curious how what are Czech interests and how this war is resolved, and I guess in what you've perceived so far in the first few days of the Trump administration, how you think how Trump might approach this, and what you would like him to do.
Well, I think President Trump definitely wants the end of the fighting. He wants to achieve the ceasefire. I think it's a good goal, and if the ceasefire would be achieved tomorrow, then from our Czech perspective, it would be fine and great. So it must be a ceasefire based on a solid basis that it's not broken by Russians in 2 months or 2 years or quite soon, and then the new cycle of violence starts, and we are ending up in the same war or even in more bloodier confrontation. So it must be a ceasefire based on solid roots and solid backing of Ukraine. That Ukraine has some deterrence against Russia. That the Russians will calculate twice if they want to attack again and start the war on the European soil again. And so on one hand, we do support the solid ceasefire, and at the same time, we hope that we will be able to work across the Atlantic within NATO as a strong alliance and even stronger alliance. I'm sure that we will be going for more defense spending in Europe as we have done in the past. Also, thanks to President Trump and his calls for that in the past, and we can achieve more, and it's fair regarding U.S. spending, and it will be beneficial for U.S. because it's going to be beneficial for Western world, and it will be beneficial for U.S. because if we go in Europe from 2% to 3% GDP spending. It means $200 billion annually spent on defense. And we can argue how much is going to be the profit of U.S. defense companies, but definitely there will be some. Some portion will go to the U.S. defense companies. So some portion of the profits and taxes will go to the U.S. budget and to the employment of people here in the United States of America. And again, it's also fair. So I think that the good deal is reachable, and the good deal is good for both sides. And I'm confident that President Trump will push us to this deal, and we will happily accept it.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I saw a clip of a little bit of President Trump's speech at Davos, which he did virtually today, and I think he was talking about 5%. But I guess that might be a little.
Well, is U.S. ready to go to 5%? No, 5%. I think we should not be ruling that out, because if the world is turbulent as it is, or even more turbulent in the next years, then we will have to be going further up. If we look into the 80s and the Cold War, so at Czechoslovakia, I think we were at 5% or 4%. So yes, eventually it may go as far as to 5%. I hope it's also a strategy to bargain, but it has to be also. We have to spend more, definitely. There is no doubt about that. But we have to spend more wisely. So there has to be absorption capacity of that spending. So you cannot do it overnight. I think we should be bold enough on going fast. But at the same time, we should not waste funds, and we should not waste money because it would backfire. And yes, there are also problems with the capacity of the industry. Here, the defense industry here in the US, of course, in Europe, the capacity is growing, and in some segments it's growing quite fast, but still it's not the case that everyone can buy everything and it's going to be delivered next year. So I think that we have to go robust. We have to see the targets for next year and the year after. I guess, and what I heard on the Hill, there will be similar discussion, or there is similar discussion here in the US, how much to raise the budget, how fast, and of course in what direction the defense spending. But I'm really confident that the deal at the NATO summit in the Netherlands can be reached. It's not a guarantee. It's not going to be easy, but definitely it is achievable. So I hope that we both or all will try to manage.
I think so. Your president was elected, I think, almost 2 years ago, about 2 years ago. Is that right? And I believe he's the first in Western or Central Europe democratically elected president or prime minister since de Gaulle, who was a general, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know what is
Uh,
the rank of the Bulgarian
oh,
president.
yeah,
So
I see. So
the military pilot.
but
So I don't know what his
okay,
rank, but there may be some others. But definitely we do have a general elected who was also chairman of the military committee of
exactly.
NATO.
That's what I was going to say. He was a senior general in NATO. How does that? What does that say about I guess his election, about Czech orientation to the commitment to security in Europe and so on? Does he have an influence about how much the country spends or as well?
Well, the Czech president doesn't have that many constitutional powers. It's quite limited. It's nothing compared to the U.S. president or to the French or to the Polish. So it's a more a ceremonial role, with few exceptions, like naming people to the board of the national bank, but or appointing people. But since it's a president of the republic which presides from the largest castle compound in the world, functioning castle compound, so it's a monarchic president in a way. And by what I want to say is that Czech presidents always had a strong ability to shape the discussion. Okay, so it's very important what presidents say. It's what guidance there is, what leadership they show, not by the decision making, but by leading by ideas and formulating the discussion. And there, President Pavel has been very firmly on the western side and transatlanticist and a person who was always in favor of working with the United States and for deeper cooperation between US and Europe. That was not the major discussion in Czech Republic during the elections, but definitely this is what he represents and where he is strong in his statements these days.
By the way, what does your government spend on defense per GDP? Since we were talking about it roughly.
Fortunately, we have reached 2% last year. So we are among those 23, I think, 23 member states of NATO, which are on the 2% and more. So after years, we have reached 2%, and I hope that we will be able to keep it. On the contrary, I think that we understand that there must be agreement of going higher, and it was commented already by Prime Minister and by President that we are ready for this discussion, and we think that we will be helpful in achieving that agreement at the NATO summit.
I met your chief of staff of your military, who I believe served in. I've met him a couple times, and he served in Afghanistan. I think he was a ranger or special forces. Very impressive. You have, I guess, if just the audience, because again, you don't read as much, I'd say, in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times about your country as much. But I guess if you were introducing, explaining to new officials in the government here why your country matters and why they're important, besides being part of NATO, why they're an important ally of the United States, what would you say?
Well, look, I would say that after the collapse of communism in the last 35 years, we have been always standing shoulder to shoulder with United States of America, no matter if there was a Democratic or Republican president. And whenever the U.S. was at war or whenever there was some campaign, then we were supportive. And in Afghanistan, for example, where General Zheka participated himself, we were among the few countries which were fighting in the south and didn't have any caveats into restrictions of how to fight. So we were part not only of the NATO mission, but also of the enduring freedom with Americans shoulder to shoulder fighting in the mountains of Afghanistan, real battles. So, and we were with U.S. In Iraq, and we were with U.S. in the Balkans, and U.S. was there with us in the Balkans, and we have tried to contribute by special forces or by other like means, but mostly we must must say that, or it must be admitted that we've been on the American side, looking at the world and at different conflicts. We understand the local vision and view of who are the real enemies, who are the real challengers, and there I think that you cannot say that the Czech Republic was deviating from that. And I think it's the demonstration of our positions on Israel. And by the way, we have been the only country besides U.S. and Israel working like together, and Marshall Islands and some other islands at the UN in different forums. We have been very much watching and cooperating with US regarding, for example, 5G and the Chinese technology. The Prague protocols reached during the first Trump administration are exactly about this. So this is not that the goals would be exactly the same, or the details would be exactly the same. But overall, we are not the only country like that, but we are among those American allies who should not be forgotten, and we are there to support U.S. leadership in leading the Western world.
Yeah, I want to get to Israel in a second. I want to just ask you one more question on Ukraine about as an ally. Could you explain what role your country has played in supporting Ukraine since the war? And I'll integrate also this question that we got from the New York Times from Laura Jakes at the New York Times, who asks like your assessment of the Czech initiative to supply Ukraine with artillery and the progress being made on that front. I'll use that as an example. Also, maybe if you could address, please.
Well, we have, besides of our own supplies to Ukraine, which we have paid for, or which are from our storages of our military, which we didn't need anymore, and which are being very useful in Ukraine. We have created the system of support of Ukraine with our friends and allies, with the different donors, different European countries, very much cooperating with US, but also, of course, with Ukrainians, and Ukrainians are themselves sometimes buying through us. The system of supplies to Ukraine, where last year we did deliver to Ukraine 1.5 million rounds of large caliber ammunition, be it artillery, tank, some missiles, and 1.5 million is quite an achievement. One third of that, 500,000, is 155 caliber, the NATO standard caliber, and I think it really helped Ukrainians to get to get better situation on the battlefield. Once last year, a year ago, they were 1-to-7 ratio, 1-to-8, 1-to-9 ratio. One shell on the Ukrainian side, 8-9 on the Russian side, and at the end of the year it was 2-to-3. So it's much easier to defend if you have this ammunition. We have been delivering different types of artillery pieces and tanks, etc. So trying to help together in a similar way how we did help, or there are some similarities of how we did help Israel in 1948. Then we tried by using the same common sense and simple logic to help Ukraine now. So one side and one thing is our political support and our direct donations, but the other is what we did not pay for. So on the contrary, sometimes our companies did get paid for it, but what we have organized together is this steady flow of supplies. Could we have done more? Of course, but is it a great achievement? Yes, and I think once there will be a book written about it.
Okay, talking about books, so I was reading your father's book on massacre in the Jews. So I want to get to Israel and the Jews issue also, because I don't know if all Jews appreciate. I think the story about 1948 that through the Czechoslovakia provided airplanes, ammunition, small arms. Is that right? It had Stalin's blessing because you had a communist government at the time, but it seems like it goes back, right? At least the massacre and the founding of Czechoslovakia. Maybe you could just explain why this country, because, I think everyone, certainly every Jew notices this. There's been a surge of anti-Semitism here in the United States since October 7th. You've seen a surge in other parts of at least Western Europe, or Central Europe and Western Europe. But your country seems a little different in our interactions there. And I've been there now twice in the last couple of years. It seems like you're almost a sea of of philo-Semitism. You're an island of philo-Semitism in the sea of almost rising anti-Semitism, which is I'm just curious if you could address that a bit.
Well, it's for a long discussion, and you can look at it from different angles, and then it's really, and I don't have a simple explanation, but it is true that over the centuries, the level of anti-Semitism in Czech society was always lower than the level of anti-Semitism in our neighborhood in Central Europe, and I would say also it could be said that in Europe as such. There are different reasons. One of the reasons is probably that the Czechs are very much agnostic, non-religious, and so you don't have this. We have never experienced this source or the magnitude of Catholic or Protestant anti-Semitism. As the Jewish population was, especially in the Czech lands, in Czech part of Czechoslovakia, very much assimilated and blended into the population, and very much associated with the Czech population. Of course, in those parts of Czechoslovakia where the German speakers lived, then they spoke German. But the Czechoslovakia in 1918 and by President Masaryk recognized Jews as a nation and basically recognized Zionism, and he was fighting anti-Semitism, and he was friend of all those Zionist congresses, etc. And he thanked, by the way, Supreme Justice Brandeis of introducing him to Wilson here, United States of America. And once the independence of Czechoslovakia was declared, he was in Philadelphia. So Czechoslovakia, from that point of view, was born in Philadelphia. So this is another link. And by the way, Masaryk had an American wife. So those are the linkages. The leadership plays a role. It's Masaryk definitely. His son was foreign minister, and he played a role at the UN and how we voted in 1947 for partition, and that we were on the committee and one of the leaders. But then you have President Havel, who was the first post-communist leader as a former dissident who visited Israel in the beginning of 90s, in April 1990. And his wish in his first address to the nation after he was elected and for the new year was that soon after he was elected as democratic president, then it was to reestablish ties with Israel and Vatican. And he was not a religious man, but it was a cultural and statesmanship there. And by the way, we did have President Zeman for 10 years, whom I didn't vote for because he was from the other side of the political spectrum, and I didn't agree with him on many issues, but I did agree with him on Israel, and he was and he is still a very much strong supporter of Israel. And for his during these 10 years as president of the Czech Republic recently, he was the staunchest ally of Israel and always on the side of Israel. So the leadership part also plays role. And then because the last point, I would say that because of the assimilation, of course, after the Holocaust, the majority, 90% of Czech Jews were slaughtered and killed and murdered. But because of the assimilation of Jews into the society, you have you have quite small Jewish community, like halachic Jewish community, but you have quite a large number of people who can trace some Jewish descent, like my grandfather, and by the way, like our current prime minister's grandmother. Okay, so it's and he has it from the mother's side, so he's more Jewish than I am. Okay, but he goes to the church. I don't. But so you have this like mixture of that, and it is quite unique. But the level of anti-Semitism changes with the level of anti-Semitism outside. So I would be far from claiming that there is no anti-Semitism in Czech society. But fortunately, it is always lower than in our neighborhood.
Look, I know many people visit Prague and Czech Republic. It's such a beautiful city and a beautiful country. I know anyone who goes, like we did, you go to what is called in English the Old New Synagogue, which I think is the oldest synagogue in Europe still standing. Is that right?
North of Alps, I think. The oldest standing north of Alps.
And of course, the famous rabbi, the Maharal, who was supposedly created the Golem monster. And it seems like the Jewish history is a important
Franz
part of
Kafka, by the way, who studied Hebrew and who was probably partly a Zionist that he passed away and was quite young, but he is a symbol of this Czech Jewish German cohabitation in Prague at the beginning of the last century.
So it seems like Jews have had an important role in Czech history over the centuries. Or I also visited Mikolov, by the way, which also the Maharal was there first before he went to Prague.
Exactly.
And there's an old synagogue there, which I encourage people to go visit. But I guess one of the things also about Israel, so there's this philo-Semitism here. You mentioned 1947, the UN partition plan, 1948, we talked about massacre, but also after October 7th, I think your prime minister came to Israel within a couple of weeks after October 7th. Is that
Our
right?
Minister of Foreign Affairs was there 2 days after, I think, like really in days. He was the first. And then from the prime ministers, our prime minister was first together with Austrian Chancellor. We picked him up in Vienna and flown him to Jerusalem. And it was, I think, 10 days after October 7th. Actually, October 7th ruined many lives and changed the Middle East and delayed at least many agreements in the Middle East. But we were to have a G2G between Czech and Israeli government, and Bibi Netanyahu, a few ministers, was to come to Prague on October 8th. So after 10 years after his last visit before. And there was to be a session of our governments, and October 7th ruined that as well. So we hope that it will come back soon.
I know that I spoke to Gilad Erdan when he was the UN ambassador, the Israeli UN ambassador, and he told me, the Czechs have been one of Israel's few reliable friends in the UN voting. I know I've talked to senior Israeli officials, including also military and intelligence, and they speak about the close relationship, how important Czech is for Israel, as since I think the EU is Israel's biggest trading partner. They have close military and intelligence ties between the two countries. I think the relations are probably more extensive and probably more important to Israel than probably a lot of supporters of Israel, at least in America, probably know. I know it was a learning experience for me.
Yeah, we welcome more people to come and to learn this experience. By the way, Prague is one of the, and the Czech cities, but represented by Prague, it's really still one of the European cities where Jews, even with kippah, can feel safe and can go around in the streets. It's one of the cities where Israelis do speak openly in an Israeli way, Hebrew, so it's not quiet, so it's not whispering, and it's safe. It's safe place. Once after October 7th, you had the attacks on Israeli students and on Jewish students at the universities elsewhere. It has never happened in Czech Republic and in Prague. So we are still keeping this safe place where there are no threats to Israelis, no threats to Jewish students, and I hope it's gonna remain to be the case. But it is also true that this disease coming from Western universities has also reached back Czech Republic. That we did have some demonstrations and disturbances during some events by these groups of protesters, similar to what you see here and what was not the case 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So I have nothing about protests, but this conduct of these protests, which is in a totalitarian manner that nobody can express their own opinion, and it's like if violently or strongly enforced. This is also a new phenomenon. So our society is also changing, but still you can feel safe there on the streets, and this is why I hope that more Israelis will be coming and doing business in Czech Republic, and more Americans and American Jews will be coming also to Prague and will experience this type of hospitality and friendship.
Yeah, I wish Columbia University or Harvard University was as safe for Jewish students as it sounds like it is in Prague. By the way, on Netanyahu, I was wondering one issue that's obviously come up in this administration, the new Trump administration, the U.S. Congress has been certainly focused on this, is the ICC, warrant, the ICC in general. And I was wondering, we saw an issue with Poland recently about whether Netanyahu could go for, and I was wondering if your government is going to enforce the ICC arrest warrant against Netanyahu.
Well, first of all, our parliament has voted against the ICC and has said that this is there were different resolutions and that this is definitely wrong and it doesn't add to the international justice. I myself think that ICC by this act has discredited itself and it will never be what it was intended to be, and it will never be like before, and it cannot come back. But let's see. From the legal point of view, we have a problem because we have this the traditional school of thought in Czech Republic by Czech lawyers and judicial system is very rigid and very Austro-Hungarian. And believe it or not, but the government has lost its sovereignty and we cannot waive it. So it's up to the prosecutors and then police, etc. So we have a problem at the moment of our own rigid internal system which doesn't use common sense and where we are hostages of that. And I just hope that it's up to after the elections for the new government or for the new parliament that this system will be changed. By the way, not because of only because of ICC. It's we did experience this rigidity and this stupidity. I must say before, once there were arrest warrants issued by Putin, and we did have to arrest people, sometimes also Israeli citizens. Then they were in custody for some time. Okay, it was individuals, but they were in custody for some time, and we never feared that they would be returned or sent back to Russia. But the system was so rigid that it took some time before the courts could have released them. Okay, so we must work out. We must change our system, which where the common sense will be used much more, and where we will be able to have some flexibility and political responsibility for such cases. Again, not only regarding ICC, but regarding other situations which we are facing. So we have also filed on behalf of Netanyahu in the past as a government several notifications or questions into the ICC prior to the arrest, that we don't think that it is a correct understanding and correct approach what the ICC did. But we are one country as part of the whole system and also as bound within the EU rules and with our rigid laws and regulations internally.
Let me ask you one more question. I'll see if some people in the room have questions. Is look, one of the biggest issues here in the United States, certainly in our last election in November, and we see it already, President Trump is focused on it already from day one, is the issue of immigration. And it's a big, obviously, political issue in Europe. And it seems to be leading, as an outsider who's not an expert in Europe like myself, you could see if some of the establishment parties are not enforcing more commonsensical immigration rules, it has led to some extremist parties gaining more popularity. But it seems like your country, and you talked to us about this when we were in Prague, has had a different approach to immigration than some of your other European countries. And I just wonder if you could just address that issue.
I think we have had cross-partisan and cross-societal agreement that we have to be very careful with immigration in the last 30 years or 35 years. So we have had a very conservative approach, and I think it's good because we are. That's one of the reasons where you can freely travel and freely walk midnight in Prague around the town. So that's not the only reason. That is one of the reasons. So we've been more on this side, and we have not changed that much our behavior or our system. As some in the Western and Northern Europe, where if you look at the glass half full rather than half empty, then they went through a tremendous change, and they have changed laws and they have changed the code of conduct, and you see the results. There is less immigration migration into Europe than what it used to be, and I hope that they have some countries who have lost party control of their system, of their cities, that they are regaining it. Every country is in a different phase, but if you compare the situation and the thinking and the rhetoric and the deeds of 10 years ago in 2015 and now, there is a tremendous change. So I think there Europe got more to the senses, and most of the European countries. Has it been fast enough? Well, you can easily argue not. But has there been a tremendous change? Yes. Does it still matter, or is it still an issue in the elections? And is it favoring, or are the extreme parties sometimes profiting from that? Of course, that's the case and that's the issue. But I hope that more and more of the mainstream parties do understand and will understand that the situation must have changed as it has, and there further changes are needed. But we have not changed our position. We have remained in our position. So it was the others who have completely changed their position.
I guess you could say that led to relatively more stability in your system. You could argue compared to other countries. That weren't you criticized by the EU or some of the other countries by your more conservative approach to immigration during those years?
Oh yeah, sometimes in the past, those 10 years ago, and not only us Czechs, but it was others in Central Europe, we were criticized and portrayed like those barbarians from the East. Okay, so it's so sometimes what is now the mainstream policy of some of the governments north of us, and I don't mean Poland, then it's much more barbarian than what we used to say and what we used to do. Okay, so there was tremendous change, and I don't think it was only like political or the narrative or the Brussels-based. You just can look at the mainstream European media and how it was. So it was much broader view. But once those West European, enlightened West and Northern European countries started to enact laws and regulations against the migration, then they also started to somehow look at it differently. That the barbarians in that sense cannot be only from the East, but also from the West.
Okay, we have a few minutes for some questions.
Thank you. Dan DeLuce, NBC News. Could you tell us what is your government's view if U.S. military assistance is somehow reduced or diminished from its current level to Ukraine? How do you expect both your government and other European governments to respond to that?
I think that most European governments will continue what they are doing now, but it doesn't mean that the U.S. assistance and U.S. leadership can be replaced. The U.S. is very much irreplaceable. So are we able and will we be able to subsidize what or to send what US is not going to be sending, to send what we have been sending plus additional to fill the gap of the US? No, yes, and it's clearly known. So I hope that the ceasefire will be reached, or I hope that there will be recalculation from the U.S. side if the ceasefire is not reached, or if President Putin doesn't want to reach the ceasefire. And he will want to reach the ceasefire only once he sees strength and leadership on the other side. Then the ceasefire is much more achievable. And here I hope that President Trump will show this strength and will show to President Putin that he is there for a good deal for both sides and not for a one-sided deal, which would not work. And by the way, which would be showing U.S. as weak. Okay, and I don't think President Trump wants to be weak, so I had hopes that he will be seen as strong and that the good deal can be reached. And I hope that in the long term we will be able to assist Ukraine in to build a deterrence, because that could lead to stability and long-term stability. And again, it doesn't have to be based on donations. It can be based on programs like lend and lease, and we can have different creativity. absolutely. But it is important to stabilize situation in Europe, and it is important for the sake of US as well, and for the transatlantic European American cooperation in other theaters in the world as well, which are, I think, only to the mutual benefit. So we have to settle some disputes. We have to recalibrate, and I think we are ready to recalibrate the trade relations, and we understand that there should be and there can be some changes. But at the end, we should both jointly emerge as stronger, and I have no problems with stronger US. On the contrary, and by that we will be able to better cope with all those who are trying to challenge us from anywhere globally. If we do more, if we do see that we have betrayed ourselves, and if we do see that if we start fighting trade wars like internally, then we will be preoccupied by them, and it will not strengthen us, it will weaken us, and all the predators outside will see it very clearly, and if the predators see weakness, they must attack. There is no other way.
Sorry, just one more question. Sorry. And as far as Russia is concerned, we've heard a lot of worry and anxiety in Europe about Russian sabotage efforts that there's in different countries at different times, including your own. What is your assessment of that threat from Russia at the moment?
There is this threat. We must be vigilant. We must be serious about it. We must not panic. There is not room for panic, or there is no need for panic. But yes, Russians will try and are trying are very creative in trying how to harm us and how to divide us. And they have been conducting sabotage attacks, and I'm sure that they will try to do more. So it's serious. Again, no need for panic, but to take it seriously, definitely. And international cooperation and the cooperation of the allies is one of the ways how to stop it, or how to avoid it, and how to avoid serious damage.
Okay, I know we have to conclude. Before we conclude, do you have any other concluding comments that no one asked you about that you would think it's important?
No comments. I just hope for the victory of the free world, and I hope for the best here in US, and I hope that the US will be strong, and I hope that we will be working together. And I at the same time think that as Europeans we should more worry about ourselves than about United States of America. This is what we are always saying inside Europe, and if we are going to be strong in Europe, then US is going to be also better off.
You put it better than I would. So thank you very much. I also hope this with the new administration, obviously it will usher in even closer, even U.S.-Czech relations, and we very much appreciate your sharing your comments today. Oh,
well, Don Jr. speaks Czech, so
yeah, that's true. That's true. And by the way, and Trump's first wife came from Czechia, right?
Well, the mother of Don Ivanka's
mother came from.
She came from the border, from Moravia, actually, from the border of Moravia and Slovakia.
So did Trump ever come to Czech Republic before? I don't know.
Not as president. In the past, yes, and even during the communist times. So he did visit several times. And when there was this phone call of Prime Minister and President Trump a few days after the elections, he started to talk about it, President Trump, about his memories, how he visited those days, and how his children have affinity to the motherland of their mother.
Oh, I see. We buried the lead. All right. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your joining us, and really, Tomas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And have a good trip to Washington.
Thanks.